Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a fall book tag, and I saw this on, I can't remember what her YouTube name is, but I love her videos. I'll link it down below. But she did this video and I thought it'd be really fun because I've never really done like a tag video on my channel before, I don't think. And it's just some really basic questions. And honestly, I feel like these book recs aren't necessarily for fall. Like these books aren't necessarily like fall fitting, but the tag is related to fall, so just keep that in mind that some of these books I wouldn't consider like fall reads or anything like that, but they just relate to the questions. So yeah, let's go ahead and just jump right in and make this a quick one. So the first question is, in fall, the air is crisp and clear. Name a book with a vivid setting. So one of the first books that I ever read that I remember just being blown away by the setting and just absolutely adoring the setting was Winter Song by S.J. Jones. This is one of my favorite books. I love this book. I actually kind of want to reread this to see if I feel the same way about it now as I did when I first read it. But when I first read it, I just really loved this book. It was like so good. I feel like this is the book that kind of got me into like fantasy romance. And I'd never read that genre before until I read this one, and I was like, oh my god, my life has changed. Like, it's amazing. But this is basically about like the Goblin King. So it's not a labyrinth retelling, but it kind of like plays on that movie just a little bit. But it's about the Goblin King and then Liesel, which is this girl who has to go down into the, you know, underworld or whatever. Not the underworld, but like, what do you call it? Like underground, where the Goblin King lives. And she has to save her sister from the Goblin King or whatever. And it's a romance and it's just so great. But the reason I love this is it has like that really dark, like kind of fairy tale vibe to it. It's a very unique fantasy world because it takes place underground and it's kind of dark. I feel like it kind of has a little bit of like gothic undertones to it, which is really nice. And it kind of reminds me, a recent book that I read that kind of has similar tones is The Cruel Prince. It has that really like magical fairy tale vibe to it. And when I read The Cruel Prince, it definitely reminded me of this book because it just has like that dark fairy tale vibe to it, but it's like fantasy and whimsical, but like really dark at the same time. And I just absolutely love this. This was like such an amazing book to read for me, I think, for like my first fantasy romance ever, and I loved it. So if you're looking for like a vibe like The Cruel Prince, I definitely recommend this. It was so good. The only downside to this book is the second book in the series was horrible. It's seriously like, I was so disappointed in the second book, but this one was so good. So number 2, nature is beautiful but also dying. Name a book that is beautifully written but also deals with a heavy topic like loss or grief. So this one's kind of hard for me because I don't read a ton of hard hitters. I mean, I read a few here and there, but like hard hitting books aren't usually my favorite to read. They just take a lot of effort for me to pick up for whatever reason. But I found 2 books actually that I wanted to talk about. And the first one is a given. It is The Song of Achilles. This book is so flippin' amazing. Like, every single person needs to read this book in their life. It is so good and so well written. Like, the way that she's able to develop these characters and their relationship and all of that is just phenomenal. And the grief and the loss that you feel in this book is just so well done, and like this book literally epitomizes this question. But the second book actually that I picked for this question is going to be a surprise because I think if you've read this book, you're going to be like, really? That one? Like, what the heck? But there's a reason I picked this one, and it's Illuminae by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. So the thing about this book, I wouldn't say the entire book is beautifully written because I don't think the entire book is beautifully written because it's written in like transcripts and stuff like that. And it's kind of hard to get used to in that regard. Like, a majority of the book isn't beautifully written. But there's a few sections, all the black pages, is actually the artificial intelligence, and it's in her perspective. And I love the writing in this artificial intelligence part. It's so interesting because it's like poetic but very mechanical at the same time, and it has like very deep, interesting undertones that you can kind of pick out. And I absolutely love this book for Aiden's parts. I've talked about this so many times, but I feel like the way that they wrote Aiden was so cool, but it's so fun to read Aiden's parts, and that's why I highly recommend this book series, is because Aiden's parts are just so fun to read. But the other reason I picked this book is because it talks about grief. And I don't cry in books. I've talked about this before. Like, it's really hard to get me to feel like massive amounts of like emotion for whatever reason. But there was one scene in this book that actually had me feeling very emotional. And it was talking about grief and loss, and I just remember feeling like a lot of emotions. I kind of got a little teary-eyed in that moment, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is a big deal because I don't really cry in books very often. So I picked this book because I felt like the grief and the loss in this book was really well done and it made me feel things, but then the Aiden parts are really beautifully done. So I feel like this fits this question very specifically, but it works. So question 4, in order to keep warm, it's good to spend some time with the people we love. Name a fictional family, household, or friend group that you'd like to be a part of. Okay, so this is interesting because there's so many books that I feel like have great found families, right? And as much as I love the found families, there's only one found family that I'd actually want to be a part of, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like other found families that I've read, like, they're fun and they're cute and everything, but I don't know if I'd want to be a part of them. Like, what they're dealing with is frustrating, or sometimes there's people in the found family that are just kind of like irritating or frustrating, and like weird love triangles that I just wouldn't want to be a part of because I hate drama. But there's one found family that I absolutely love that I would actually want to be a part of. And I feel like this is such a freaking given, and I feel like everybody's gonna answer this the same way. The Night Court, or the Inner Circle, or whatever. I love this found family, and it's the only found family that I could think of that I would actually want to be a part of because they're just so cute and lovable and loyal to each other, and it's honestly like the best found family that I've read as far as like wanting to be a part of it, if that makes sense. So I had to say it, and I'm really sorry. Okay, so the colorful leaves are piling up on the ground. Show us a pile of fall colored spines. 1 second. So this was easy because my books are organized by color, so I just picked out the red, orange, and yellow spines. Are those fall colored? We've got Recursion, one of my favorite books, Alice Hoffman, The Rules of Magic, Shattered Dreams, which is a polygamy book, Daisy Jones and the Six, The Decent Proposal, and Dark Matter. I think those are pretty fall, right? Oh, I missed number 3. Okay, let's go back to number 3. Fall is a back to school season. Share a nonfiction book that taught you something new. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about a book that I've never talked about on this channel before, but it's one that I thought was really interesting, and some of you guys wouldn't want to read this, which is totally understandable. Nonfiction, I feel like, is very subjective. Like, if it's a topic you like or are interested in, then you want to read it. If it's not, then you don't. That's totally fine. But one book that I actually found very interesting and I actually learned a lot from was a book called Godless, How an Evangelical Preacher Became One of America's Leading Atheists. So this is a really interesting book if you like theology or like studying theology and like what it's all about or whatever. If you like looking into religions and like deep diving into religions, I think it's really interesting. And if you like psychology, it's really interesting because what I found so fascinating about this book specifically was how somebody that is so like strong on one end of the spectrum and seeing the process in which they like deconvert themselves, you know, how many hoops that you have to like jump through to like get from one extreme to another extreme. I think that's so fascinating, and I think it takes like so much courage and so much like personal reflection and stuff like that. I just think it's so interesting to see somebody make such a huge transition, and it was really interesting because not only is there a lot of facts and interesting information that you can gain from this, but it's also kind of more of like a memoir as well, so you're kind of seeing his life and like how he went from being somebody that just traveled around the world in his van to like preach the gospel. Like, he was so like determined to save as many people as he could, and then he went from that just completely to another end of the spectrum. And it's so interesting to me. Like, I love seeing that. Like, I love deconversion stories or people that like leave cults and how you can go from like truly believing one idea to completely switching to another idea. I find that fascinating. Even like political parties, like one person like being a Republican and then switching completely to becoming a liberal, or, you know, vice versa. I just think that's such a fascinating thing to watch or to hear somebody talk about. And this book is like the perfect example of kind of seeing somebody deconvert from one extreme to another. And it's just fascinating. I loved it. And I learned a lot while reading this book as well, because I didn't really grow up religious, so I don't know like tons and tons of facts about religion and the Bible and all that kind of thing. So it's really interesting to kind of deep dive into something that you don't know about as well. It has kind of the memoir aspects, which you guys know I love those, while also giving you a lot of interesting information. So I really liked it. I think I gave it 4 stars, but I read this book a long time ago, but I really liked it. So number 6, fall is the perfect time for some storytelling by the fireside. Share a book where somebody is telling a story. Okay, so I could only think of one book for this, but it's the perfect book because it's the book I'm reading right now, and it's The Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. So this is a book about a vampire who, well, he's not a vampire actually. He's like half vampire, half mortal, and basically these half-breeds or half-bloods, they are trying to save the world from the vampires. The vampires are trying to take over, and the only people that can really defeat the vampires is these half-bloods. And he is one of the half-bloods, and he's trying to basically save the world from the vampires taking over. And it's basically him getting interviewed by somebody throughout this whole entire book, and he's kind of like telling his story, and it's very, very, very Interview with the Vampire-esque, but it's really, really good. I love how this is set up. I love the storytelling element to it. I think it's a very unique way of telling the story, and it's the only book I've really read where somebody is like telling a story. I think The Ocean at the End of the Lane might be a story, like a storytelling story. I can't really remember if I'm being honest, but I think that the main character is kind of telling a story in that book. But this is the one I'm reading right now, and it's really, really good. It's a huge chunker. I'm only about like 25% of the way through it, but I really love this so far. It's really good. It's dark, and I would definitely recommend this for a fall read, actually, because it is kind of dark and gothic and gritty, very violent. This is definitely adult. It's not young adult, but it's really, really good. I highly recommend it for like a storytelling book. Number 7, The Nights Are Getting Darker. Share a dark, creepy read. Okay, so I don't read a lot of horror. It's just not a genre I really read too often. I would like to read more horror, but I've had a hard time finding horror books that truly scare me, and I'm not really sure why that is. So if you guys have any like books to recommend to me that are actually like really scary and like give you the like heebie-jeebies, let me know, because I tend to not get super scared in books. But the one book that I found to be incredibly disturbing was Intensity by Dean Koontz. Now, this isn't like a horror. Well, it is a horror, I would say, but it's not like monster horror or like, you know, fantasy horror or paranormal horror where you're dealing with like weird like things. It's more like real life horror where you're dealing with like a serial killer murderer like guy, and the main character, well, okay, so this murderer guy like kills the main character's like best friend, rapes and kills her, and then the main character is trying to like get justice for her friend by like following this guy and killing him basically. So he wants to like, or she wants to get him back basically, and so she's basically following him through this whole book. She like sneaks onto his camper, and he's like a psychopath, like a psycho killer, and it's dark, 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 dark. Like, this is definitely one of the more dark books that I've read where you're just like, ugh, like it just gives you like not good feelings, you know? So if you're like really not into that kind of thing, don't read this because it's definitely icky, you know? It's like an icky read, but it was like horrible. Like, it's horror for sure. And it's very intense. It keeps you on your toes. Like, there's stuff going on throughout this whole entire novel. Intensity is like the perfect title for this book. But okay, so number 8, The Days Are Getting Colder. Name a short, heartwarming read that could warm up somebody's cold and rainy day. Okay, so for this book, I picked one of my old favorites, which I would love to actually reread this book because I read this a long time ago and it was so good when I read it, and I want to read it again because it was just so cute and heartwarming and just such... Actually, this found family is really good as well. Like, this is an awesome found family, so I could definitely add this to the found family question. But it's The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. If you haven't read The Outsiders yet, like, you need to. It is such a good book. Like, these little boys... They're not even little boys. They're like, I don't know, in their teens and I think early 20s. But they're so amazing. Like, they're this like group of outcasts basically. And it's kind of a book about like the social jockey kids and then the like outcasts. And this takes place in like the 50s, you know, like Greece times, I think. It's kind of like a story about how you're in different social circles, but like nobody is really that different, if that makes sense. And it's just so well done. It's just such a classic for a reason, and it's such a good book for a reason. It's just amazing. Like, I love all the characters, like Pony Boy and Soda Pop, and I want to read this again so bad because when I read this, I just remember falling in love with it, falling in love with the characters. And I remember too, after I read this, I felt like I had the same feelings that I had when I watched Stranger Things. Like, you remember that feeling that you get when you watch Stranger Things where it's very nostalgic, very heartwarming in like this weird way. Like, even though like Stranger Things is like a horror type of show, like you still get those like really sweet, heartwarming vibes from it. That's exactly how I felt when I read this. So definitely read this. It's a short, cute, heartwarming read. It's sad at times, and it's just really, really well done. In fact, I think I'm gonna read this again soon because it was so good and I loved it. Okay, so the next question is, fall, luckily, it's my favorite season, returns every year. Name an old favorite that you'd like to return to soon. So I just talked about The Outsiders, but I picked Eliza and Her Monsters. This book is a book that I read, I don't know, like 4 years ago, and I loved this book. This book was so good. There's something about this book that feels so, like, cute and, like, heartwarming and, like, just, it's fun to read. Like, the premise of this book is just really fun to read. It's about a girl who is the writer, and she's in high school. She's the writer of like this really, really, really famous webcomic, and this webcomic is huge. It's like Harry Potter of webcomics, and everybody reads it, but nobody knows that this girl in their school is the writer and the creator of this world, and she's basically kept it a secret all of her life because she has really bad social anxiety and she like doesn't want to deal with the attention and stuff. But then she ends up meeting a guy who writes fan fiction about her world, and she meets him, but he doesn't know that she's the writer of the webcomic that he, you know, writes fan fiction for. And she like keeps it a secret, and it's just so good. It's such a cute, interesting little premise, and I loved it so much. And this definitely has fall vibes. Like, if you're looking for a really good book for fall, this is it, because it takes place during like the winter fall holidays, like Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas. So it definitely has like those cozy vibes. There's definitely scenes where they're in like bookshops and it's like chilly outside and all that kind of thing. So highly recommend this for fall, but I really, really want to read this again because when I read it, I loved it, and I want to see if I like it as much now as I did, you know, 4 years ago. There's even some like pictures in there, and it's just a good read. Pick it up. Fall is the perfect time for cozy reading nights. Share your favorite cozy reading accessories. Okay, so this was hard for me because I don't have any cozy reading accessories. Like, I don't know, candles, blankets, socks, I don't know. But one thing that I definitely love is having like a really comfy, cozy reading area. And if you have any like corner in your house that's not being used, or a room in your house that's just kind of like a junk room or whatever, just make yourself a cozy little reading nook, whether it be a corner or a room or whatever, because I feel like when you have that cozy space where you can like, you always have your candle there, you always have your books there, you always have like blankets and maybe a bookshelf around, all of those special little things that make reading so wonderful. If you have a special place for, you know, your reading time, I feel like it makes such a huge difference. And as you guys know, I created this little library in my pretty room. If you guys are followers of my main channel, I always call this my pretty room. I made it into my library, and I didn't really ever use this room too much actually before, and it was just kind of here, but I never used it. But now that it's kind of like my reading room, I use this room so much more than I used to, and I always read in here, and it's cozy and it's clean, and it makes me just kind of forget the rest of my house, forget the rest of my chores. I can close the door and just kind of be by myself, which is amazing. Another one of my favorite cozy reading accessories, would you consider this an accessory? Maybe not, but it's my favorite reading snack, and that's pretzels. If you've never eaten pretzels while you read, I 100% recommend, because they don't make your hands like dirty and sticky, so you don't like ruin your books because your hands aren't getting dirty. And two, they're the best nibbling snacks. Like, you literally can just like nibble one pretzel for like 5 minutes, and they're the best snacks for reading. And I always have like a giant bag of pretzels in my house for when I'm reading. So I can always like just get one handful of pretzels that will last me like half an hour because I just like nibble on them while I'm reading. So I'm telling you, best reading snack. Last but not least, spread the autumn appreciation and tag some people. I hate these kind of questions because I always just say anybody can do this, whatever, blah, 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 which yes, anybody can do this, but I guess I'll tag some people that I know don't even probably watch my channel. Brittany the Bibliophile, I love her videos. Hardback Hoarder, I do know she watches some of my videos, but I don't know. I would love to see her do this because she's very spooky and I love it. And Books with Chloe would be really fun to see do this. I don't know, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head, but if you want to do this. And let me know and I'll come watch it if you do this. So anyways guys, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys are as excited for fall as I am. You guys know I'm a summer girl, I love hot weather, but there is something really special about fall, I have to admit, and I love Halloween, so it's gonna be nice. And plus I'm kind of ready to wear some of my like fall clothes. Like, I'm kind of tired of wearing shorts and stuff, so I'm excited for fall. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you guys in my next one.